Greetings, everyone, and welcome to ACEDS Data Unmasked, streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Michael Quartararo. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we will be joined momentarily by Vazantha Meyers, who is vice president of discovery services at Haystack. Haystack, of course, is a provider of professional services, e-discovery, and cybersecurity. In the legal space, you can learn more about Haystack at HaystackID.com. They are also a valued partner of ACEDS, and we, of course, like to showcase what our partners are doing. So we invited Ms. Myers to join us to discuss what's happening within the industry and showcase some of what she's been up to at Haystack. So let's get into it. Vazantha, thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure. Okay, let's start with a little bit about you. For those who don't know, tell us a little about yourself, how you find your way into this thing we call e-discovery, and of course your role at Haystack.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I keep saying like I've been in the industry 15 years. However, I think it's a little bit more than that. I'm still using pandemic time, Mike. So
That's all right.
Years. But I started at Mayer Brown as a litigator. Working a lot in the e-discovery and records management practice. So I worked under who's my mentor currently still is Ashish Prasad, who's one of the trailblazers in the e-discovery space. And so I worked with him for 5 or 6 years at Mayer Brown and then moved over to the vendor space with him, running his operations in a managed review company. Started with Discovery Services and then moved over to Etera and then Haystack through acquisitions. But have sort of maintained that relationship with e-discovery from the aspect of counsel, right? So, and operations. So I come now as mainly working with corporate clients on their processes and procedures and documentations and workflows around managed review and sort of the whole EDRM spectrum. So that's how I kind of got here through from law firm to vendor space over the last 20 years.
So I understand that you've been in the space for a while. What could you share with our listeners today about significant changes you've observed in e-discovery, in the practice, in the technology? What stands out to you over the last decade or so?
Well, the most significant change in my experience has been the move from those services from law firm focused to vendor focused. That was sort of the big change that happened several years ago, where a lot of that work was being outsourced to law firms, sort of moved into the vendor space, which takes advantage of lower costs, increased security and technology. And so that was sort of a change that happened years ago. Now we're up. The obvious change has been technology, right? The use of analytics as a standard when it comes to document review, for obvious reasons. You know, years ago, I used to say we're going to have to come up with something else because the data will not stop growing. And we've seen that data grow exponentially and normalized huge volumes that's sort of impossible to deal with on a consistent and defensible way unless you put technology behind it. And it started off very simple with threading, ways of categorizing data so that you can easily make decisions on groups of data, to really the use now of technology as aggressively analyzing data for its merits, right? So we have the use of predictive coding, continuous active learning, that takes more of a analytical look at the context of data and helps make us make decisions on where that data should be categorized. The other significant change has been the use of remote review. And that's happened over the last, 4 or 5 years. In the industry, however, we've been doing it for more than a decade now. And with that, our use of it, and now that you're seeing is a lot of infrastructure and technology around just the use of remote reviewers, contract reviewers who are working from home or in spaces that aren't, brick and mortar. And so that's required us, again, to come up with technology, with workflows, with reporting and auditing, all servicing towards remote review. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And then, of course, we have new data concerns with now that we have to incorporate. And I know we're going to get to that later, but it's significant the amount of, cyber incidents that come up, how much we're looking at data in protective stance versus, litigation only. So technology comes into play, auditing, reporting, workflows on how we service and protect data or respond to incidences dealing with data privacy or breaches.
Yeah, and I can identify with some of what you said. Many years ago, when I was in the law firm world, it was very much services were directed to the law firm, which were then directed to the client, and that dynamic has dramatically shifted over the years. It's been interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a little bit about security and data privacy. How does the industry address some of the issues that are cropping up related to data privacy and cybersecurity during the document review process in particular?
Well, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of for every project is how do we protect our clients' data, right? So first, when we're looking at documents, or especially in the review space, or if we're looking at review tools, et cetera, how do you protect the privacy during that interaction? And because we deal with remote reviewers, we have a lot of infrastructure around just data protection during the course of document review. And we have systems that allow us to control access to data by contractors, and not only access, but what they can do when they're in that environment. We want to lock down, their ability to manipulate the data, their ability to pull data out of our secure environments, and our ability to know exactly what they're looking at and what they're doing with the data. So that's a lot of auditing, a lot of control, a lot of systems in place, so that we have a strong hand around who's looking at our data and what they're doing with it. So that's something that we do just through that mechanism of we're looking at documents. How do we protect the document in that instance? The other thing we have to be concerned with when we're looking at data, right, is how are we categorizing certain data? So it's not just about protecting the data from the eyes that are looking at it, but how are we categorizing data in terms of its sensitivity? So we make sure that for every project that we have, that we are cognizant of teaching the reviewers, right? And we work with experts, data privacy experts. We work with law firms in terms of instructing reviewers on how to protect data, how to categorize data appropriately so that it can be protected through the production. So that usually falls down to sensitive data, right? PII, PHI, corporate, private business information, et cetera. All of that information is very sensitive. We want to make sure that we are aware of what we're seeing, how we're categorizing that data, and what's happening to it during the production. So a lot of that boils down again to technology. So we have the use of, the categorizing through the review tools, but also using tools like redaction or, anonymizing information in that data. And so that if it's produced, it doesn't, it's not produced with sensitive information, but you can still see, in terms of categories, what was in the data before we touched it. We want to make sure that we are having conversations about how that data is being transferred, who's going to see what, right, or your different confidentiality levels. So in terms of what happens with that data when it leaves us, we want to make sure that everyone's clear about what data is in there, where it's going, who can see it, and how it can be used.
Yeah, no, great. All right, so I don't think any interview on e-discovery and technology today is complete without the mention of the word artificial intelligence. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
It's making its way. AI is making its way into e-discovery and review processes. It's a significant trend. Obviously, you've seen the hype and the talk, but what has Haystack done to what's your approach to this integration, and what unique benefits have you observed from leveraging AI in your e-discovery and review efforts?
Yeah, so speaking, mainly in terms of managed review, document review, one of the, AI is going to be a tool that we use like we use any of the other analytical tools when it comes up and it's been vetted and there's auditing around it and sampling and ways in which we can attest to its defensibility, right? So I know that some of that is being discussed in the courts right now, the same way that, predictive coding cow or were being discussed in terms of its use. So I don't know that I know relativity is sort of incorporating that. So I think that that's coming, right? And we'll have to adapt it and put processes around it the same way we do any other tool that we use, so that we can explain how we're using it and how we're auditing it and how we're verifying that information. That's going to happen no matter what tool you use. So that same process is going to be followed. The other ways that we do use AI is we use it very aggressively in our recruiting process. We have over 20,000 reviewers in our database. We have clients who have very specific needs when it comes to the type of document reviews we will be handling, right? So from multi-district litigation to privilege-only reviews to redaction, having very sensitive PII reviews. And so, and across all industries, healthcare, banking, pharma, and we have reviewers with different levels of skills and experience, right? Some of them have been doing privilege reviews very aggressively. Some of them have a lot of experience doing redactions in PHI. Some have been working on, product liability cases. They come with a lot of different experiences.
Sure.
Substantively and just in time, right? Like, how long have you been doing this? We collect all of this information from the client and from the reviewer, and we put that in the database in a way that AI can go through, and when we have a case, and say, here are your best and your top prospects for this review. On top of all of the sort of experiences that we've talked about, the other thing that we want to incorporate into our profile, right? When we're creating a profile for AI to use, either from the client or from the reviewer, we want to make sure we're feeding it a lot of data. The other thing that we feed it, right? Because AI only works as well as the data you give it, no matter where you use it, right? And I know they're teaching it to learn, but right now we're feeding it a lot of information. And the other thing that we feed is our experiences with that particular reviewer. So every reviewer will have a profile that will say, this is how our experiences with this particular reviewer. They were super fast. They were very accurate. We have metrics that we can incorporate into their profile that says this is how fast they are on reviews on average, on the latest review, on these sorts of reviews, right? On this FCPA review, this reviewer was a huge performer. We collect all of that information, as well as we test all of our reviewers in a couple of ways, right? This isn't AI, but it's related to the data that we give.
No, understood. It's interesting because I remember managing document reviews myself back in the day, and what would happen is, if we were working with an agency, we'd get a stack of resumes, and someone would have to go through them and identify, this person, worked on a document review relating to this pharma product, right?
Right, based on their information too, right? Based on them telling you, I'm very good at this. Right. I have 10 years of experience doing these.
And who doesn't think they're not good, right?
Right, I do, right. So we test all of the reviewers when they come into our system, which gives us a baseline, and we use that in two ways. And I know I'm digressing, but so we test, we give them the document review test. They come into our system, and so we have their initial scores. And so we see where they are proficient at, and we also can rank all of the reviewers in our system based on those entry scores, right? Those initial scores. The process that I just described earlier, where we are also taking that information from the projects they work on, right? This reviewer had a project that dealt with privilege review. They were at the top, their DPH was, 60 to 70, which is very high these days. And we can talk about that. And their overturn rate was X. And so we have also this growing score for these reviewers, or this current living score for these reviewers based on our work with them. So we have all of the information they've given us, right, on their resume and during their one-on-one interview. We also have their initial score, and then we have their current score, so we can see their growth, and we can see where they're advancing, where they need help, what projects are suitable for them.
And I imagine that it helps in coaching them too, right? If someone's underperforming or
absolutely,
you can help them along.
Yes, and so again, this is digressing. It's not specific to your AI question, but one of the things that we feel very strongly about in terms of managing a review is paying attention to what the reviewers are doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So every day, the review managers are responsible for looking at a report that says, this is what your team is doing in terms of performance, right? This is how fast they're going. These are their overturn rates. And so what we don't want to do is dismiss anyone just because of these, metrics. We want to have the opportunity to go in and say, hey, we think that this is incorrect, or you can go faster. This is our suggestion for you to get there. This is our sort of like letting you know what our expectations are. This is what we think that you did wrong. This is what would be correct. This is a different way of looking at the document. This is how you can speed up the review. We want to be proactive in making sure that reviewer is getting better. And then we want to be able to track that in our system so that when we do use AI, the AI is being sort of a smart selector, right? Like it has all the information it needs to make a smart choice.
It's really smart. It's really smart because I think, we used to just throw a bunch of lawyers at documents and just say, all right, get it done.
Yeah, I've been there. I remember my first year at Mayor Brown, I had document review projects. I had never done them before. It started off, I remember my first one was in a warehouse in Ohio using paper clips and Post-it notes to categorize the data. I mean, that's telling you how old I am. But, once you get to so a new reviewer, right, as I was a new associate, is trying to understand the substance, the legality of it. But they're also trying to understand all the technology, the tools, and you need help doing that. Like no one's going to come into this for the first time and get it right. And so you want to be very proactive about training, educating, and helping reviewers of all levels advance. And that's one of the other things that we take very seriously at Haystack. We have a lot of program around training and advancement. So we encourage reviewers to go out and get skills. We have this sort of daily response to the reviewer's performance. We have trainings, we have process training, we have substantive trainings, we have lunch and learns, we have mentorship, all of the tools. And we're going to touch on mentorship and some of that later, but all of these tools that we have available as experts who've been in the industry for 20 years, right? Yeah. Including our experiences and our knowledge of technology. And even if it's not my own expertise when it comes to technology, we can pull someone in to help an individual advance through, navigate at least through all of the, ups and downs of learning anything in this industry, right? Which is sometimes difficult. But it's so important that we can't let it go to, again, this remote space. We have to be as mindful of giving the reviewers as much attention as they need to get better, because they're doing us a service, right? When they work for us, we want to make sure that we are giving that back. I used to tell when I was managing more directly, I used to tell the people underneath me is that, your time here is going to be spent working on these different projects and for our different clients, but also make the time work for you. Make sure that you're spending your time growing as in your career. And, doubling back, that's one of the questions that we do ask all of our entering candidates, review candidates is, what do you want to do in this industry, right? Is this something that's a stopgap, which it is for some people, right? Is it a filler, which it is for some people? They're in, different practices and they need something to fill in some gaps. And so, but there's some people who are career minded, and we want to make sure we acknowledge that and give them the space to not just help us service our clients, but give them the space to service themselves in this industry. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of resources out there. So,
and having things like that really engenders some loyalty and some, gives people a sense that they're more than just a cog in the wheel, right?
Right. And I think it's important to do that. I mean, we have competitors in this industry in terms of people who can hire individuals to work on projects, right? Be it document review or cyber breach response, et cetera. And we want to be the top choice. We want to be someone that they want to work for. And that training that I talked about is, invaluable, because it's not just about that particular project. It's about the next one, right? It's about, what do you do after? What have you learned during this project that you can move over into the next? And I take that on as a professional too. one of the things that I care about when I'm servicing my corporate clients is sort of what do I learn from one project that I can move over to the next that services this client and their specific needs. Yeah. The reviewer, the individual, the contractor should be doing the same thing. Like, what can I learn that I can move over into the next phase? So it definitely engenders loyalty, but it's also a service to the whole community as well, right? So even if they never work for me again,
right?
Even if I never see this person again, I would have contributed to, the quality of the industry to some extent. I've done my part to make sure that reviewer is a better reviewer, a better e-discovery professional, even if they move on to something else. We've had reviewers that moved into tech, right? Just based on their experiences with us or in the industry.
I want to pivot to a topic I know is near and dear to you, important to me too, as the head of an industry association, diversity, equity, inclusion, women in technology. It's my understanding that you play a significant role at Haystack in their DEI initiatives.
Yeah.
Share with our listeners, if you could, some of the strategies or programs that you have implemented at Haystack to support the growth of women, people of color, and diversity, equity in general within the e-discovery community.
For everyone, right? Like, so the idea that whatever we do in terms of diversity is a benefit to the whole company, including the individuals. So everyone sort of benefits from having a very aggressive and proactive diversity program. Diversity and inclusion program. So one of the things that we did when we started our DEI program is that we really put a focus on education that first year because it was new. So we wanted to be clear that we were talking about the same definitions, that we were very clear about the goals and how we were achieving those goals and what we thought the impact would be on what are the programs that we put together. So the first thing that we really tackled was we did a diversity survey. So just asked the whole company a series of questions on where they thought we were and what they thought we could do better. And a lot of the answers sort of guided what we did initially, right? Because that's inclusion. You get people to participate in what you're doing as opposed to dictating to them. And so the space that we created was like, let's get answers. Like, let's have a conversation with folks about what we're doing, what these definitions mean when we talk about special interest groups or affinity groups, and what our goals are for diversity. And then, so we understood exactly not exactly, but we understood sort of the high level goals and topics or concerns from employees, which I think is just, you can't start something like this without doing that, right? Like, you can't just go and say, hey, we're going to be a diverse and inclusive company, and so do X, Y, and Z, which is, sort of feels that way if we just said, now we're doing X, Y, and Z. So we started with
between lip service and actual.
Exactly, right. So we just created avenues of conversation initially, right? So we created our town hall at the company where every quarter Hal Brooks speaks on the state of the company. It opens that conversation up to questions from our community, right? Our Haystack community, and provides feedback in real time. We also have a hotline where people could ask questions. We also have regular meetings with the DEI group where we ask people to come and participate, ask them what do they want to see, what are they looking for at Haystack. So that first year was all around having a conversation about it. And then from that conversation, we didn't pivot. We just kept going straight into these initiatives. So we created the affinity group so that, and I'll tell you, that's one of the things that we did get questions on when we created the affinity group, right? So that's groups of like-minded individuals. So we have an African-American affinity group, the women's affinity group, that they can get together in a safe space and have conversations and create their own initiatives, et cetera, that they bring up to the executive level, and we, implement the ones, and we implement most of them. So we had questions about, well, if you're separating everyone, how are we now more inclusive, right? And I think that, we answered this question sort of very definitionally, like, here's what the reports are saying on affinity groups. This is why we're doing it. But also just giving people time to, join one, see how you like it. What are you getting out of it? And our feedback was that they really appreciated having because we're, especially nowadays, we're not brick and mortar, right? People aren't having conversations at lunch. They're not having conversations around the water cooler. And we wanted folks, especially folks who felt sort of outside of conversations within companies, right? Folks who were more diverse and who felt like maybe they weren't included in conversations, for them to sort of have that safe space to say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what my experience is, not just at Haystack, but just in life. Like, I just want to talk about it with someone.
Yeah, understood.
Right. But from those, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I had another question. Finish your thought.
I was going to say, from those conversations, we were able to then pull in topics, events, service suggestions from those groups to the bigger group and have a more fulsome conversation. And it became, people weren't nervous because they felt supported by this group that they were coming out of to have that conversation. And we've had some amazing programs come out of that. My partner in crime is Pam Bartlett over here. She's the chief people officer who started the DEI group with me, and she's HR focused. And so, she's sort of the front line with all the questions that we get when people are complaining. And we turn that to where people are having those conversations when they are, being proactive or positive, or bringing ideas and can we do this and that. And so we were able to have conversations that were less reactive and more proactive because we gave them safe spaces.
Really, really important, I think, to normalize having the conversation. And the only way to do that is to continually have the conversation, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
For some folks, it's difficult and uncomfortable, but it's important. If you make it normal, then people will be more comfortable talking about it.
It is, yeah. And I've just seen, it's been we're very new into this, right? I think we're 3.5 years in. And so the amount of programming that has come out of our DEI efforts was the first goal is to get people involved.
Right.
And we created avenues where everyone can get involved in something. And it's not just that, we have all this, like we have this Haystack calendar that's out. We have a mental health speaker that came and is giving us, conversations and allowed for questions and back or interactive conversations. We had Mayor Bell, who I know that came and did a series of conversations about diversity, the definitions, et cetera. And out of those conversations have become like very significant improvements, I think, in morale, or at least a place for people to say, hey, I can take this complaint not just anonymously and complain to a help desk, but I can take it to some place, right? Be it their affinity group or the DEI committee or any one of us separately, and really put this somewhere where I think something will happen because of it. Like, I'm not just speaking in the wind.
That's really important. So related to this, let me ask you, what's been your experience connecting with influential women? How have these connections sort of influenced your own career journey? And what would you offer to other women seeking sort of advice in moving forward with their careers?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways. So my first experience with someone being a guiding force, a mentor in this industry globally, right? Overall, not just e-discovery, was my mother and her group of friends. So my mother was an attorney. She was very active in the National Bar Association. She was very involved politically in the National Bar Association. And she was one of the very few women who held office in the National Bar Association. And most of the women around her in that group were very dynamic, very proactive, very intelligent women who, just by their nature were inclusive, right? So I knew how impactful it was to her career. And I knew that was something I needed to do to advance my own career, which is find your mentors, find your resources, find people who are doing that and are willing to help you. Not everybody will, right? And that doesn't mean you stop with the first person you ask, but you find the people who are, who are your, who you respect. You respect not just the work that they do, but their trajectory, right? And you ask them for help, right? You ask them for advice. one of the conversations we've been having over the last year in groups is sort of the impact and use of finding mentors in the legal space, right? And I think for women, it's important to find someone who can relate to the struggles that they are experiencing in this industry. The feelings of being marginalized and how to sort of overcome that, or where to put that feeling, right? How to make that feeling actionable. And you have to find the people who you respect enough to take their advice. It's not enough to just ask people questions. It's not enough to just pepper folks with questions, but you have to find someone who you trust their advice. Because once you start, what that relationship required, it's a two-part relationship, and it requires some reciprocity. You have to be serious about wanting the help, and find someone serious about trying to help you. So that's one, is find your people. So early on in my career, I've done that. But specifically when it comes to e-discovery, I've been a participant in a lot of conferences over the years, over the last 15, 16 years. And you meet a lot of folks who fit the definition that I just described. They are dynamic women who are willing to help, who have, traversed the complicated pathway from, that shows up in e-discovery, right? And ask them for advice and ask them for help and be sort of in companionship with them. I found that it has been the most significant relationship with those individuals, those women, in my whole career. Because not only do they give you extremely helpful substantive advice, like very much on, what tools should I use? Who are you talking to? Like, what processes are you following? And that's a conversation that never stops. It's always happens, right? That's a resource for me. But also to understand that what the struggle is. If I say, oh, this day was bad because X, Y, Z, I felt dismissed, I was being interrupted, they understand it, they don't dismiss it, and they tell you how to navigate that as well. And so that has been, and some of my best friends have come out of those relationships, that kind of relationship. And so it's been very significant. I suggest that anybody who's coming in this industry, be it a woman or any other level of diversity, right, that they categorize themselves into, find somebody who they again trust to ask questions and trust advice, and who will give them that advice and sort of work with them through that process. Like, I have my very first mentee was someone who was new to Mayor Brown when I was at Mayor Brown. She is someone who did exactly that, right? She asked questions, she took advice, we were very candid in our conversations. I explained to her everything I knew about what I've gone through, walked her through things that she was going through, and a lot of it was just very conversational. She is someone who has been now one of my best friends. I was at her wedding. This is, so many years later, but she always says, the one thing I really appreciated about you is that you gave advice, very freely, very candidly, very transparently. And that helped me through my career. And, I've had reviewers that I've worked with, people who've worked with me over the years, that we've maintained that relationship. So my point in saying that is that these are generally long-term relationships that you're committing to, where you should commit to, right? And then they become mutually beneficial because
it's a wonderful thing when it happens. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have a mentor and it's not working. But you just find another one. You'll know.
You ditch that one, right? You'll know when it's not working. You ditch that one. It's like a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? You ditch the bad ones and move on. It doesn't mean you should never have one. You just have to find the right one.
That's right, and it's true after years and years of therapy. That's true for therapists as well. All right, we're almost out of time. I'm sorry.
Oh, I can't believe it went by that fast.
It does go quick, but we're sharing important and life-changing information here, so it goes quick. What's going to be Haystack's presence at ILTA next week?
Haystack will be there in full force. We are very active at ILTACon over the years, and so we will be there. I personally won't be there. I hate that I have to miss it, but we will be fully represented from a lot of our experts across all of our service offerings, right? So we'll have people there from forensics, from our cyber breach, from data privacy, from managed review. So there'll be, if you have a question to ask us about any of our service offerings, someone will be there that can answer that question.
Okay. And that's a perfect segue to my last question. Yes. What should listeners do to get in touch if they're interested in talking with Haystack?
Well, we have an information available in terms of contacting us for any of our service offerings on our website, right? HaystackID.com. They can reach out to me for any, like if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who can answer the question.
That was always my favorite answer. When somebody asks me something, ask me the question. If I don't know, I'll find out who does.
Right. It's one of the benefits of being old in this industry. Like we are, right? If I don't know the answer, I know someone who knows the answer.
I appreciate that. All right.
Rachel, yeah, please ask me.
Yes. All right, Vazantha, this has been great. Thank you so much for making time. Thank you for coming on and sharing your views. If you are interested, listeners, in our short form video interviews, you can find our Data Unmasked and We Are ACEDS live streams on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or check out the ACEDS YouTube channel, and you can watch previously recorded content there. Thank you so much, V, for joining us. Have a great day, everyone, and be kind to one another.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure. Happy to come back whenever you have more questions for me, Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.